There are names that echo through history. Names carved in marble, etched in bronze, written in textbooks for generations to remember. Names of presidents and generals, inventors and pioneers, men whose achievements built the foundations of our modern world. And then there are the names that were stolen, erased, buried beneath the weight of someone else's glory. Names of those who suffered so others could succeed, who bled so others could heal, who screamed so others could be celebrated in silence. Her name was Anarcha Westcott. You won't find her in most history books. You won't see her face on any statue. You won't hear her story in medical school lectures. But her suffering, her unimaginable, deliberate, prolonged suffering, shaped modern medicine in ways that would make your fucking soul weep. She was 17 years old when it began. Just 17. A child, really, with dreams and fears and hopes like any other young woman. But she was born black in Alabama in 1817, which meant she was born property. Born to be used. Born to be broken. And when a white doctor named James Marion Sims decided he needed bodies to experiment on, when he needed flesh to practice his surgical ambitions on, when he needed screams to drown out his doubts about his methods, he chose her. 30 times. 30 fucking times. She was strapped to a table and cut open without anesthesia. 30 times, she felt every slice of the blade, every pull of the thread, every moment of agony as her body was used as a testing ground for medical history. They called him the father of modern gynecology. They named hospitals after him. They erected statues in his honor. But every woman who has ever been saved by the procedure he invented owes her life to Anarcha Westcott Screams. This is her story. The story they tried to bury. The story they tried to erase. The story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about medical progress, about human dignity, about the price of innovation. This is the story of a girl who became medicine's greatest unacknowledged pioneer. And it's time the world finally heard her name. Before she became a footnote in medical history, before her body became a battlefield for surgical experimentation, before her screams echoed through the halls of medical progress, Anarcha was just a girl. She was 17 in 1834, tall for her age with hands that had never known softness, eyes that had seen too much but still held hope. Like every enslaved person, she woke before the sun, her body moving through routines carved by necessity and survival. The quarters where she lived weren't homes. They were storage units for human property. One room, dirt floor, gaps in the walls that let in winter cold and summer heat. But within those walls, Anarcha had carved out something resembling life. She had become the unofficial mother to the younger children in the quarters. When babies cried in the night, it was Anarcha who rocked them. When children scraped their knees or caught fever, it was Anarcha who made poultices from plants she'd learned about from the old women. In the fields, under the merciless Alabama sun, she picked cotton from sunrise to sunset. Her fingers bled from the sharp plants. Her back ached from bending over endless rows. But even there, even in that hell, she found ways to be human. She told stories. Jesus, how she could weave a tale. Stories her grandmother had told her about Africa, about ancestors who were kings and queens before they were cargo. Stories about freedom that existed somewhere beyond the plantation boundaries. Stories that kept hope alive in hearts that had every reason to despair. And she sang. God, how she sang. Work songs that made the hours pass faster. Spirituals that reminded everyone they were more than property. Lullabies that could quiet the most inconsolable child. Her voice was freedom in a place where freedom didn't exist. She was learning to read. Dangerous as hell for an enslaved person, but Anarcha was smart. Too smart to be contained by the boundaries others set for her. She traded bits of food for lessons from the preacher's wife, practiced letters in the dirt when no one was watching. There was love, too. Samuel, another enslaved person on the plantation, who looked at her like she was the sun itself. They couldn't marry legally. Enslaved people weren't allowed legal marriages, but they had carved out their own promises to each other. They talked about running away, whispered plans in the dark about heading north, about finding freedom, about having children who would never know the weight of chains. Dangerous dreams, but dreams nonetheless. She was brilliant. The overseer's wife had noticed her quick mind and brought her into the house sometimes to help with cooking and cleaning. Anarcha absorbed everything. How to read people's faces, how to manage a household, how to make something from nothing. She was a teacher, a healer, a storyteller, a dreamer. She was a young woman who helped deliver babies in the quarters, who knew which herbs could break a fever, who could calculate costs and portions better than most educated white women. She had plans. 17 years old, and she had fucking plans. She was going to marry Samuel in the spring, jumping the broom in a ceremony the other enslaved people would witness and honor even if the law wouldn't. She was going to have children and teach them to be strong, to survive, to hope. She was going to save enough money, pennies earned from extra work, to maybe, possibly, someday buy her freedom. It would take decades, maybe her whole life, but she was going to try. She was going to fight for her humanity in whatever way she could. This was Anarcha before the world broke her, before medicine used her, before history forgot her. She was a complete human being with dreams and fears, talents and ambitions, love and hope and fury at the injustice of her situation. She was 17 years old, brilliant, strong, beloved by her community, and planning for a future she would never get to live. Because in just a few months, her body would become someone else's experimental laboratory, and the woman she was meant to become would be sacrificed on the altar of medical progress. But for now, for these last precious months, she was simply Anarcha, and she was beautiful. May 1845. Anarcha was 17 and heavy with her first child. After everything she'd endured, after all the brutality of plantation life, pregnancy had brought her something she'd rarely experienced: genuine joy. She and Samuel had finally jumped the broom the previous winter, their union blessed by the community even if not recognized by law. This baby was their hope made flesh, their future taking shape beneath her heart. The older women in the quarters had been teaching her everything they knew about childbirth. Granny Celia, who delivered more babies than anyone could count, had been showing her breathing techniques, positions that might help, herbs that could ease labor pain. But even pregnant, Anarcha was expected to work. The master didn't give a damn about her condition beyond the fact that she was producing another piece of property for him. She picked cotton until her back screamed, carried water until her legs could barely hold her. The labor started on a Tuesday morning in early May. Anarcha was in the fields when the first contraction hit her like a lightning bolt. She doubled over, one hand clutching her belly, the other grasping at the cotton plants for support. Samuel and the other women got her back to the quarters as fast as they could. Granny Celia took charge immediately, barking orders to boil water, gather clean cloths, prepare the birthing area. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Anarcha was strong, breathing through the contractions like she'd been taught. The baby was active, moving well. Granny Celia nodded approvingly, saying it looked like an easy birth. But hours turned into a day, then a day and a half. The baby's head had crowned, but wouldn't come further. With each contraction, Anarcha pushed with everything she had, but nothing changed. The baby was stuck. Granny Celia had delivered hundreds of babies, but she'd never seen anything like this. The baby was too big, or positioned wrong, or something was preventing the normal progression of birth. And with each passing hour, both mother and child were growing weaker. 2 days, 2 full days of labor. Anarcha was delirious with pain and exhaustion, her body beyond its limits. The contractions kept coming, but they weren't helping anymore. The baby wasn't moving. Samuel was losing his mind outside, begging to be let in, threatening to fight anyone who kept him from his wife. But birthing was women's work, and all he could do was listen to her screams and pray. By the 3rd day, Granny Celia knew they were in trouble. Real trouble. The kind of trouble that killed mothers and babies both. She'd seen it before. Prolonged labor that ended with the community digging 2 graves instead of celebrating 1 birth. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, something changed. One massive contraction, stronger than any before it. Anarcha screamed. Not the scream of labor pain, but something deeper, more primal. The scream of a body being torn apart. The baby came. A son, beautiful and breathing and perfect. Samuel was finally allowed in, and for one glorious moment, they were a family. Anarcha held her child, tears of joy mixing with tears of exhaustion. But something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The prolonged labor, the pressure of the baby's head trapped for so long, had done internal damage that none of them fully understood yet. Within hours, it became clear. The pressure had created a hole between Anarcha's bladder and vagina, a vesicovaginal fistula. Urine leaked constantly from her body. She couldn't control it, couldn't stop it, couldn't hide from the smell and shame of it. In 3 days, Anarcha had gone from a strong, healthy young woman to what the white world would consider damaged goods. She couldn't work the fields anymore. She couldn't be around people without the constant reminder of her condition. And somewhere in Montgomery, Alabama, a white doctor named James Marion Sims was hearing about an interesting case. A young enslaved woman with a condition he'd been wanting to study. A condition that could make his medical reputation if he could figure out how to fix it. Anarcha's real suffering was just beginning. Dr. James Marion Sims arrived at the plantation 3 weeks after Anarcha's devastating birth. He was 32 years old, ambitious as hell, and looking for opportunities to build his medical reputation in ways that proper Charleston society wouldn't allow. Word had traveled fast about the enslaved woman with the interesting condition. Vesicovaginal fistula was a medical puzzle that had stumped doctors for centuries. If someone could figure out how to repair it, they'd become famous. And Sims wanted fame more than anything. The conversation between Sims and Anarcha's master was purely business. She couldn't work anymore, couldn't be around the other enslaved people because of the smell. She was worthless as property now, unless she could be useful for something else. Sims saw opportunity where others saw damaged goods. Here was a woman he could experiment on without consequences. No family to object, no legal rights to consider, no one to sue him if things went wrong. Perfect. When Sims first saw Anarcha, he didn't see a young mother suffering from birth trauma. He didn't see a woman in pain, isolated from her community, struggling with a condition that had destroyed her dignity. He saw a puzzle to solve, a stepping stone to glory. In his own words, the case presented was one of unusual interest. Not a woman in agony, not a human being deserving compassion. An unusual interest. A fucking specimen. The deal was simple. Sims would attempt to repair the fistula. If he succeeded, the plantation would get a working slave back. If he failed, well, she wasn't much use anyway. Win-win for everyone except Anarcha. Sims had built his practice serving wealthy white women in Montgomery. Gentle examinations, careful procedures, plenty of laudanum for pain management. But those women were paying customers with husbands who might object to rough treatment. For Anarcha, he set up shop in a crude backyard hospital. No comfortable examination rooms, no proper surgical facilities, no anesthesia. Because in Sims' medical worldview, black women didn't feel pain the same way white women did. This wasn't some personal quirk of Sims. This was accepted medical doctrine. White doctors genuinely believed that black people had thicker skin, fewer nerve endings, higher pain tolerance. It was racist bullshit dressed up as science, but it gave them permission to do whatever they wanted. Sims was already planning his medical papers before he'd even touched his first patient. He was calculating how many successful surgeries he'd need to establish his reputation, how many medical journals he could publish in, how many speaking engagements this could lead to. And Anarcha wasn't going to be his only experimental subject. Word was spreading about other enslaved women with fistulas caused by difficult births. Sims was building himself a collection of test subjects. While Anarcha lay in agony, unable to control her bodily functions, isolated from everyone she loved, this man was planning her torture. And he called it medicine. 2 different worlds were about to collide. On one side, a brilliant, ambitious white doctor who saw human bodies as stepping stones to fame. On the other, a 17-year-old black woman who just wanted to hold her baby without shame. One of them would become famous. The other would become a footnote. But both of their names should be remembered. One as a pioneer, the other as a monster. June 15, 1845. 6 weeks after her devastating birth, Anarcha was led into what Sims called his hospital, a converted outbuilding that looked more like a barn than a place of healing. She could barely walk. The constant leaking of urine had caused painful sores on her legs and back. Her skin was raw, infected, burning with every movement. But she was still expected to participate in her own torture. The operating table was a piece of rough wood covered with a thin sheet. No padding, no comfort, no consideration for the human being who would lie there for hours. The leather restraints attached to each corner told the real story. This wasn't about healing, it was about control. Sims brought an audience. Other doctors, medical students, anyone who might spread word of his innovative techniques. They filed in like it was a fucking theater performance, taking their seats to watch a young woman be dissected alive. Imagine being 17, already traumatized by birth injuries, and being told to strip naked in front of a room full of white men who see you as less than human. Imagine the terror, the shame, the complete helplessness. Sims made other enslaved women hold Anarcha down. Not just any women, her friends, her community members, people who loved her. He forced them to be complicit in her torture, knowing they had no choice but to obey or face punishment themselves. They tied her hands first. Anarcha's fingers, still strong despite everything she'd endured, gripped the leather restraints so tightly her knuckles went white. She knew what was coming. Everyone in that room knew what was coming. Sims took his time setting up, explaining his technique to the assembled doctors like this was a classroom demonstration. Scalpels, forceps, surgical thread, each instrument described in clinical detail, while Anarcha lay naked and terrified on the table. She could hear every word, every clinical description of her case, every excited discussion of the experimental technique they were about to try on her flesh. She wasn't a patient. She was a specimen. She wasn't a person. She was a puzzle. No anesthesia. Let me repeat that, because it's important you understand. No fucking anesthesia. Sims genuinely believed that black women didn't feel pain the same way white women did. Or maybe he just didn't care if they did. The first cut went through her like fire. Anarcha's back arched against the restraints, every muscle in her body tensing against the violation. Her scream, Jesus Christ, her scream, filled that room and echoed off the walls like a wounded animal. And the white men watching? They took notes. They fucking took notes while she screamed. Like her agony was data to be recorded, observations to be cataloged for future reference. Sims cut deeper, looking for the tear in her bladder wall that was causing the fistula. Every movement of his scalpel sent new waves of agony through Anarcha's body. She begged, God, how she begged, for him to stop, to please stop, but her words meant nothing. The women holding her down were crying, sobbing as they watched their friend being tortured, knowing they had no choice but to help or face the same fate themselves. They whispered apologies in her ear, told her to be strong, promised it would be over soon. Hours. The surgery lasted for hours. Anarcha's voice gave out from screaming, reduced to hoarse gasps and whimpers. Her body went into shock multiple times, but Sims just waited for her to recover and continued cutting. When he was finally ready to close the incision, Sims took his time with the stitching too. Each pull of the thread through her flesh was another moment of agony, another stitch in the tapestry of her suffering. By the end, Anarcha wasn't screaming anymore. She was beyond screaming. She lay there like her soul had left her body, eyes staring at nothing, breathing shallow and rapid. And when it was over, when Anarcha lay broken and bleeding on that table, Sims turned to his audience and declared the surgery a success. Not because it had healed her, it hadn't, but because he had successfully performed the procedure he'd planned. They applauded. While she lay there brutalized and traumatized, they fucking applauded. For the technique, for the innovation, for the medical advancement. Within days, it was clear the surgery had failed. The fistula was still there, maybe even worse than before. But that didn't matter to Sims. He had learned things, made observations, gathered data, and he was already planning the next surgery. Because that's what you do with experimental subjects. You keep experimenting until you get the results you want or the subject breaks completely. 29 more times. 29 more times, she would endure this. 29 more times, she would be strapped to that table and cut open while conscious. But she survived the first one. Somehow, impossibly, she survived. "30 more times. Over 4 years, Anarcha was dragged back to that table 30 more times. Each surgery lasting hours. Each one performed without anesthesia. Each one a testament to human endurance beyond comprehension. The second surgery came just weeks after the first. The wound had barely begun to heal when Sims decided he needed to try a different approach. Anarcha begged, actually got on her knees and begged, not to go through it again. By the fifth surgery, Her hands had permanent indentations from gripping the leather restraints. The wood of the operating table was stained with her blood, worn smooth by her body's desperate movements against the pain. And Anarcha wasn't alone anymore. Betsy arrived after a difficult birth left her with similar injuries. Then Lucy. Then others whose names we don't even know. Sims was building his collection of experimental subjects. Surgery number 8. Anarcha had learned not to scream immediately. It only gave out her voice faster. She had developed her own coping mechanisms, ways to disappear inside her own mind while her body was being violated. By surgery number 12, something in Anarcha's eyes had changed. The hope was gone. The fight had been surgically removed along with pieces of her flesh. She had learned to survive by becoming less present in her own body. Meanwhile, Sims was getting better at his performances. Each surgery drew bigger crowds of medical observers. He was refining his technique, becoming more confident, more theatrical. Anarcha's torture was becoming his traveling show. Surgery 15, 16, 17. The medical students weren't just observing anymore. They were participating, learning on Anarcha's body, practicing techniques on her flesh, treating her like a training dummy that happened to scream. Between operations, Anarcha's body was a roadmap of surgical scars. Her abdomen looked like a battlefield, crisscrossed with marks from failed attempts. The repeated trauma had left her malnourished, weak, existing in constant pain. But her community never abandoned her. The other enslaved women took turns caring for her, sneaking her extra food when they could, holding her when she woke up screaming from nightmares about the operating table. By surgery 20, Anarcha had developed an almost supernatural ability to endure. Not because the pain was less, it never got less, but because she had found reserves of strength that most people never need to discover. And Sims, he was documenting everything, writing papers about his innovative techniques, corresponding with medical colleagues across the country, building his reputation one surgery at a time on Anarcha's suffering. By surgery 25, Anarcha could predict every step of the process. She knew exactly how Sims would position her, which instruments he would use first, how long each phase would last. She had become an expert in her own torture. Each scar told a story of endurance. This one from the surgery where Sims tried a new type of suture. That one from the operation where he experimented with different angles of approach. Her body was a medical journal written in pain. Surgery 28. 29. By now, Anarcha had been Sims' experimental subject for nearly 4 years. For years of repeated trauma, of having her body used as a testing ground, of surviving horrors that should have killed her spirit entirely. The 30th surgery felt different from the start. Sims had been perfecting his technique for years on Anarcha's body and the bodies of other enslaved women. He had finally figured out how to repair vesicovaginal fistulas successfully, and it worked. After 30 operations, after 4 years of torture, after unimaginable suffering, the repair finally held. The fistula was closed. Anarcha's body could finally function normally again. Sims was ecstatic. He had done it, cracked the code, solved the puzzle, achieved the breakthrough that would make his career. He had successfully developed a procedure to repair vesicovaginal fistulas. For Anarcha, the successful surgery was both salvation and condemnation. Her body was finally healed, but her spirit had been carved away piece by piece over 4 years of medical torture. But she had survived. Against all odds, against all reasonable human limits, she had endured 30 surgeries without anesthesia and lived to see the other side. She had paid the price for medical progress with her own flesh and blood. 30 times. She survived 30 times. Remember that number. Remember what it cost her. Remember who paid the price for the miracle. (1853). Dr. James Marion Sims arrived in New York City like a conquering hero. Word of his revolutionary surgical technique had spread throughout the medical community, and suddenly everyone wanted to know the genius who had solved the vesicovaginal fistula problem. He opened the first hospital in America dedicated exclusively to women's diseases. The Women's Hospital of New York, funded by wealthy patrons, staffed by eager medical students, and built on the foundation of Anarcha's screams. Revolutionary medical pioneer, the father of modern gynecology, savior of suffering women. The newspapers couldn't get enough of his story. The brilliant doctor who had conquered one of medicine's most challenging problems. And how did he treat his new patients? These wealthy white women who could pay for his services? Gentle examinations, careful procedures, and all the opium-based anesthesia money could buy. Such a contrast to the brutal experiments he'd performed in Alabama. Medical journals published his papers describing the Sims technique for fistula repair. Medical schools added his procedures to their curriculum. Doctors across the country and around the world began using methods perfected on enslaved women's bodies. He gave lectures to packed auditoriums, describing his innovative approaches to gynecological surgery. Standing ovations every time. Medical professionals hanging on his every word, eager to learn from the master. In 1884, he published his autobiography, The Story of My Life. 400 pages about his medical genius, his contributions to women's health, his pioneering spirit. Anarcha gets mentioned briefly as an interesting case study. They erected statues in his honor. First in Montgomery, Alabama, right in the heart of the city where he had tortured enslaved women. Then in New York's Central Park, where tourists could admire the great medical pioneer. James Marion Sims, 1813 to 1883. Surgeon and philanthropist who founded the Woman's Hospital. His brilliant achievement in the cure of vesicovaginal fistula will be remembered among the greatest triumphs of surgery. Hospitals named wings after him. Medical schools established Sims professorships. Surgical societies created Sims awards for excellence in gynecology. His name became synonymous with medical innovation and compassion for women's suffering. He lived to be 70, comfortable and celebrated until the end. He died in Paris, still practicing medicine, still receiving honors, still being praised as a pioneer of women's health care. His funeral was attended by hundreds of medical professionals, all mourning the loss of a great humanitarian. The man who had advanced women's health care, who had dedicated his life to healing, who had made suffering women whole again. Not one obituary mentioned Anarcha Westcott. Not one eulogy acknowledged the enslaved women whose bodies had been his laboratory. Not one memorial recognized the true pioneers of gynecological surgery. The world applauded him. History celebrated him. Medical progress canonized him. And the woman who had made it all possible remained invisible, unnamed, unacknowledged. But her silence doesn't mean she didn't exist. Her erasure doesn't diminish her contribution. Her invisibility doesn't make her any less real. For over a century, Anarcha Westcott existed only as a footnote. A brief mention in medical histories, a nameless patient in Sims' experimental records, a ghost haunting the margins of gynecological textbooks. Generations of medical students learned this Sims technique without ever knowing about the woman who endured 30 surgeries to perfect it. They studied vesicovaginal fistula repair without understanding the human cost of that knowledge. The speculum Sims designed while experimenting on Anarcha became standard equipment in gynecological exams worldwide. Millions of women have been examined with the instrument that bears his name, never knowing it was perfected through the torture of an enslaved teenager. Her story was buried in archives, hidden in the footnotes of Sims' own writings, scattered across plantation records and medical journals that few people ever bothered to read. She became a medical mystery, a woman without a face or voice. Medical museums celebrated Sims' contributions with elaborate exhibits. His instruments were displayed behind glass, his techniques explained in detail, his impact on women's healthcare extensively documented. But no exhibit mentioned the women who made his success possible. His statues stood in public squares while her burial place remained unknown. His name was carved in stone while hers was whispered only in the stories passed down through generations of black families who remembered what white history chose to forget. At medical conferences around the world, doctors presented papers on techniques derived from Sims' work. His portrait hung in hospitals and medical schools. His legacy was discussed, debated, celebrated. But the enslaved women who paid the price for that legacy remained invisible. Every successful fistula repair, every woman saved by the procedure Sims invented, every medical student who learned his techniques, they were all connected to Anarcha's 30 surgeries. But that connection was deliberately severed from the historical record. When medical histories mentioned the enslaved women at all, they were described as willing participants, grateful for the medical attention, lucky to be part of groundbreaking research. The racism was so embedded that even their torture was reframed as benevolence. Anarcha's descendants, if any survived, grew up not knowing their ancestor had helped revolutionize medicine. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren lived and died without understanding they were connected to one of the most significant medical breakthroughs in history. No statues, no hospital wings, no medical schools bearing her name, no awards for courage or contribution to medical science. No recognition that she was as much a pioneer as the man who cut her open 30 times. But forgetting doesn't make something untrue. Silence doesn't erase reality. Invisibility doesn't negate existence. Anarcha Westcott lived. She suffered. She endured. She contributed. She mattered. And now, finally, after more than 150 years of silence, her story is being told. Her name is being spoken. Her humanity is being restored. The erasure is ending. The forgetting is being reversed. The silence is being broken. Today, when a woman suffers from a vesicovaginal fistula, she receives compassionate care in a sterile operating room. She's given general anesthesia, ensuring she feels no pain. The surgery that saves her takes about an hour, and she recovers in comfort with proper pain management. The instruments that heal her are descendants of the tools that tortured Anarcha. The technique that saves her was perfected on Anarcha's body. The knowledge that makes her surgery successful was written in Anarcha's blood and tears. Finally, medical schools are beginning to teach the full story. Students learning gynecological procedures now hear about Anarcha Westcott, Betsy, Lucy, and the other enslaved women whose suffering advanced medical knowledge. In 2018, after decades of activism by historians and civil rights advocates, Sims' statue was removed from Central Park. The bronze that once celebrated him alone now acknowledges the enslaved women who made his success possible. Monuments are being erected to honor her memory. Museums are including her story in their exhibits about medical history. Her name is finally being spoken in the same breath as the advances she made possible. Young medical students, especially Black women entering gynecology, now know they follow in the footsteps of a pioneer. Not just any pioneer, their pioneer. A woman who looked like them, who suffered for them, who paid the price so they could heal others. Families who never knew their connection to medical history are discovering that their ancestors contributed to human knowledge in the most profound way possible. The anonymous have been given names. The forgotten have been remembered. Her story has become a cornerstone of medical ethics education. Students now learn about informed consent, patient rights, and the dark history of medical experimentation through the lens of what was done to Anarcha and women like her. But this isn't just about correcting historical records. This is about recognizing that medical progress has always been built on human courage. The courage of patients who endured experiments, who risked their bodies for knowledge, who paid the price for breakthroughs. Every woman whose life has been saved by vesicovaginal fistula repair is connected to Anarcha Westcott. Every successful surgery echoes her 30 operations. Every patient who recovers with dignity owes something to her suffering. Say her name, Anarcha Westcott. Remember her not just as a victim, but as a pioneer. Remember her not just for what was done to her, but for what she endured. Remember her not just as property, but as a human being who changed the world. Share her story. Tell your children her name. Make sure that medical students know her contribution. Ensure that her sacrifice is never forgotten again. She was 17 years old when they first cut her. She endured 30 surgeries without anesthesia. She changed medicine forever. She was human. She was brave. She was brilliant. Her name was Anarcha. Remember her.